war, it's clear Russian forces are gradually stepping up the severity of their attacks and bombardments. We've seen key infrastructure targets being hit, such as the nuclear plant overnight and the TV tower.
Today we're going to talk about Knife Edge Nose Gunner, and nothing else. Just that. So yeah, originally what I was going to do was I was going to do a review of Nuclear Strike 64. I put a lot of time, money, and effort into it, and it's just not the right time to release it right now. So instead, we're going to play Knife Edge Nose Gunner. First off, let me just say, what a name. Knife Edge Nose Gunner. With a name like that, who knows what to expect? Well, not a ton, most likely, but our European friends have even less to go on. They only got half the title, Knife Edge. Still, half a title is better than nothing, I guess. The cover art gives you a pretty good idea of what you're in for. You got a spaceship, and you're gonna use it. Pretty standard stuff on the 64. Around the back of the box, you've got this. Plenty of 90s tude, basically. And they're not kidding about the chimichangas. This game might give you motion sickness. One thing I do want to say, again, is this game might make you motion sick. There's a lot of fast movement at times, and there's a lot of slow down at others, and it just whips around sometimes. So, be advised about that. The game was developed and published by Kemco, and released in 1998 around the world. Kemco produced a number of 64 games, including Charlie Blast Territories, Top Gear Rally 2, Top Gear Overdrive, and Top Gear Hyperbike. There's no real series to talk about here. It's a standalone game, and it was released exclusively on the N64. You want to play it today? You either gotta brush off a card or find an emulator. Do it legally. Knife Edge Nose Gunner is a first-person on-rails shooter, which is about an eighth as fun as you might expect, because it doesn't support a light gun. The N64 didn't have an official light gun, and I can't even find anything about it having an unofficial one either. Instead, what you do is you use the joystick to move your cursor around the screen. Simple enough. You use the Z triggers to fire your Vulcan cannon machine guns, and the A button to fire special weapons. You also get screen-clearing bombs as you play and accumulate score. You use the C buttons to shift your ship about 15 degrees in each direction to avoid incoming fire. This isn't necessary for the first few levels, basically, excluding some bosses, but the first time you'll really be spamming it is on Stage 4, Cold Vengeance. But I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself there. We'll talk about the levels in a minute. You'll be using your weapons to take down a number of different enemies throughout each level. Along with the normal enemies, you'll also face a mid-boss and final boss of each mission. Pretty much exactly what you might expect from an arcade-style shooter like this one. And while it is mostly a simple arcade-style shooter, it does have one fun trick up its sleeve: co-op multiplayer. It took me some effort to get 4 people together in a room to play it, but let me tell you one thing. It's easily the best way to play this game. It makes it a lot easier to laugh at all the dumb choices in the game when you've got other folks there to laugh with you. They also didn't really scale the difficulty well, so when you have 4 players, you can really crack through it. Overall, multiplayer is the best way to play this game. But who are we fighting? And why? I think it's time to look at the story. I'd say Nose Gunner isn't one of the nuttier stories in video games, mostly because the N64 era was packed full of crazy stories. A lot less third-person action-adventure games in realistic settings back then, if you know what I mean. Either way, let's check the manual and see where we're starting out at. Ah yes, the manual. Container of all necessary information to begin your conquest for the N64. At the end of the 20th century, the United States announced a new frontier plan, an ambitious program to enable humans to migrate to Mars during the 21st century. The United States Congress, blah 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 blah. There's a lot of stuff here. What it basically comes down to is, in the 21st century, we settled Mars. After that, aliens showed up. Now we gotta kill them. There's only 3 characters in the game. You, your boss, and a woman that you rescue in the 3rd mission. Speaking of missions, the game breaks down into 6. In order, they're Amethyst Ravine, Dead City, Crimson Lake, Cold Vengeance, and that's where the manual stops. Guess we gotta check out the strategy guide for the other ones. That's right, the strategy guide. Nintendo Power had a strategy guide for this game when it first came out. Stage 5 is Creature, and the last stage is Space Station, though they're sort of combined in Nintendo Power here. Here's where I gotta own up to something though. I didn't finish this game. I couldn't. I tried. I really did. But it's an arcade shooter. Unless you put real time into learning it, you're gonna have a really hard time finishing it. Now that we've checked out the gameplay and the story, why don't we check out how the game sounds? Psychofunk is the term I'd use for this soundtrack, that classic 90s game music of not quite drum and bass. It isn't bad, but it also doesn't really stand out, especially compared to other games of that time. Still, at the very least, the synth-heavy soundtrack isn't offensive. The sound effects are kind of bit-crushed and, they're N64 sound effects. They're not terrible, and they serve their purpose, but they're just not great. Now for my favorite part of the video, the part where I get to tell you about the neat things that I found while I was researching this game. For instance, this comic that was in Nintendo Power, the month the game released. It looks like some MS Paint nightmare made in 20 minutes. While we're talking about ads, how about some other ads that showed up in magazines? There's another one from Nintendo Power here, there's also this one from Electronic Gaming Monthly, and there's also this one from GamePro. Now let's check out some previews and reviews. I couldn't find a ton, but I did find a couple. Nintendo Power gave it a 6.7 out of 10. I'd say that's pretty accurate. They cover basically everything I've already said. Electronic Gaming Monthly gave it a 4.5, a 7, a 6.5, and a 4. If we look at the wiki page, we can find some more review scores. Famitsu gave it a 22 out of 40, GameSpot gave it a 4.9 out of 10, and Game Informer really hated it and gave it a 3 out of 10. I can't really fault any of these reviews, frankly. It's not a great game. It's very middle of the road. It's barely good. The Nintendo Power Strategy Guide is actually pretty useful, but I also used a strategy guide on IGN found here. What about cheat codes? Well, there's basically two. There's a level select that you can get to, and there's an extra difficulty setting. There's also a few Game Shark codes for infinite armor and infinite bombs, but unless you have a Game Shark, those aren't useful. Right now, Knife Edge Nose Gunner goes for about $10 or $11, and for that price, I mean, it doesn't hurt to pick it up and play around a little bit. Just don't expect to get a ton of enjoyment out of it. Thank you for stopping by and checking out this video. I really appreciate it. My friends and I stream on Twitch at least once a week, normally more often than that. We also have a bunch of other social things you can check down in the description down below. Thank you to my friends who helped me record the multiplayer game footage. That's Robbie, Kyle, Ashley, and Carrie. Super appreciate that. It's really great of you. And to everybody else, I hope you have a great day.